coordinator at Books Are Magic. If you don't know, it's an independent bookstore just down the block on Montague. We're so excited tonight to have Frederick and Hafizah Augustus with us to celebrate Frederick's new book, We Alive Beloved. Before we get started, I want to point out a few logistics for tonight. We'll be doing a hand-raised Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, hold them tight. We'll get them answered. After the talk, Frederick will be signing and personalizing at this table to my right. And we'll let you know how to line up for that when that comes at the end. And if you're joining with us virtually on the live stream, you can buy a copy of the book in the live stream description. So tonight, to celebrate this wonderful new book of poetry, We Alive Beloved explores a rich tapestry of themes, from the intricacies of relationships and the heartache of loss to the wide-eyed wonder of existence and the challenges of exploring the possibility of parenthood in our modern age. Each poem reaches out to readers, offering a mirror to their own journeys and emotions, inviting them to be seen and acknowledged in its lyrical embrace. If you haven't bought a copy yet, we've got so many. Buy them for yourself and for your friends and for your neighbors and for everyone you know. Our star of the show tonight, Frederick is a Westchester-raised, two-time New York Times bestselling author and a genius across genres. His books include, but are not limited to, We Alive Beloved, Patriarchy Blues, which we also have to purchase, and A Black Friend. He has won both the Letter Review Poetry Prize and the Letter Review Essay Prize. And our wonderful conversation partner, Hafizah Augustus is a Nigerian U.S. writer who debut memoir, The Black Period, on personhood, race, and origin, which of course we also have for you to purchase. Won many awards, including the 2023 Penn Open Book Award and a 2023 Lambda Literary Award. He's also the author of the poetry collection Un-American, which was an NAACP Image Award and a Penn Open Book Award finalist. Without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome.
I feel like I'm a little heavy for this thing.
Fred, you gotta sit down. Just doing your crotch.
Oh, right. You're welcome. So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being here. There's some surprising faces, and especially because of the fact that the book is not out yet, technically, but everyone will have theirs for Juneteenth. What a turnout and surprise that is. But I really want to focus for a second on just right now in this world, with everything that's happening, taking a second for all the lives that are being stolen in Gaza. So if we could just take a second for that. Thank you. And when we're done with that second, now that we are, my hope is that everyone finds some way to be actionable going forward about how we actually liberate the people who are being absolutely decimated by bigotry, capitalism, and military-industrial complex. So my first poem I want to start off with tonight, and you all are the first people I'm actually ever reading for, besides the time that I read my audiobook for Spotify. I started crying in the booth. Oh, I said this? But the first poem I want to read, I'm going to read two before Hafizah comes up, is Hymn Tender. And I want to read this one specifically because my brothers are here. So many of my brothers are here right now, so many of the men who pour into me, who allow me to show up in ways that are wonderful and completely garbage and help me figure out what we're doing next and who I'm going to be next. So, Hymn Tender is laughter until our abs hurt, the reclamation of humanity. Should we find out? This way, brother. Between the lines of their definition for masculine, where we chuckle like children until our cheeks hurt, build each other up until our hands are calloused, voices rasp from being honest about our wounds. In the wisdom of our tears, we remember old language. vulnerably stitching together a bridge to healing. Or, if you knew, we can just sit here and be silent. So that poem and that last line for me actually is really important. So for those of you who listen to Erykah Badu, one of my favorite things that Erykah Badu has ever said is we can just sit here and be silent. And she was saying it in terms of loving a black man. And so I use that as my last line because I'm also talking about black men primarily loving each other. So it doesn't have to always be romantic, and sometimes it can also be romantic, but regardless, we can just sit here and love one another. So shout out to Erykah Badu. And the next poem I want to read is also, it's more of a dedication, I guess today to myself. I've had a really hard day. Hafizah saw it right in my face as soon as she walked in. It's been a day, boy. This one is entitled A Black Man's Smile. And I wrote it the day I found out that my friend Twitch had died by suicide. So for those of you who know Twitch, he was the DJ, dancer on The Ellen Show. I met Twitch when I was on The Ellen Show, and we became cool, just talking on social, things like that. And I got to do a few events with him in New York around some of the things I was doing early on in having a public presence or whatever nonsense it is. So I wrote it for him, and I also wrote it for Khalif Browder. I would imagine that everyone here knows who Khalif Browder is, but Khalif Browder died by suicide after the monstrosity of Rikers Island basically snatched the life from him before he actually ended up taking his life, because that's what that entity does. So also, while we're talking about gossip, we can't not talk about prison abolition. So A Black Man's Smile. I always show teeth, less for myself and more for you. I'm not afforded luxuries of tears, weariness, scowls. For what shelter is there for the black man? Less than a cardboard box for the black boy. When storms rage and winds howl, we achingly ask the ocean, do you cry when you see us drown? So that's A Black Man's Smile. Hafizah, let's do it.
Hello everyone, so good to see everyone here. So Fred's audiobook, so if you have Spotify Premium, it comes with it. And I started listening to it, and I literally thought that Barry White had come back to life. This man's voice is so deep. I'm just like...
So it's funny because I'm a very transparent person. For those of you who have either read my books or follow me online or whatever, just know me in person, I change the inflection of my voice quite often because I'm so... Usually, for those of you who haven't read Black Buck, by Mateo, he's right there. It's a New York Times bestseller and a multiple award winner. Similar to what the conversations he's having in that book, I started practicing changing the inflection of my voice because white people were scared of me. Like in corporate settings, right? Like as a big black man, I would be like, yo, what up, good morning. They're like, oh, hey. so I'm like, hey, good morning. And you're like, so yeah, I go back and forth.
Yeah, well, you brought your Barry White for it.
Yeah. Quiet storm, baby.
Yeah. All right, Fred, so you write both fiction and prose, both for young adults and for adult audiences, and now you've arrived at poetry. Why? Why did you come here?
I don't think that I arrived. I started with poetry. Poetry was my original language. My grandmother taught me how to write. Thelma Ford, who's the reason for not only this book, but my entire career. And she heard me like being really into hip hop, right? Like I was just, I remember rapping, Jay-Z and stuff like that. And she's like, what's that? And I'm like, oh, this is that, whatever. And so I started rapping, right? I started, being very young, just rapping along the things. She's like, you should write some of that down. I'm like, nah, this is rap. She's like, no, it's poetry. And so she's like, no, if you actually write the words down. I'm like, oh shit, this is poetry. And so that's actually how I arrived at writing poetry, just in my rhyme book. And I think that one of the things I actually endeavored to do with this is help people reimagine what poetry is, right? So I actually write a poem about hip hop and Jay Dilla and so on and so forth because it's all poetry, right? So if anybody in here who's ever had a rhyme book, anybody in here has ever written a love letter and a few lines, you know, you're a poet. I'm sorry, you're a poet. You know?
Do you still have that rhyme book?
So
That's a yes. That's a yes.
I think Portia's one of the few people who has ever heard me do one of my rhymes from that era. You know, that I'm feeling everything from your head to your sweat. Anyway.
Some things are best for me. So I'm curious, like, what is your process for each of these genres? And so, because, like, you know, before I sit down and write a poem, I first try to get as sad as possible. You know? And if I'm not, I can't write one. So, like, how do you approach it on page?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. So, and also for those who don't know, I'm not sure if this was said, Hafizah, beyond being all the amazing things that I've said, Hafizah is also my agent. So can you imagine that Hafizah's an award-winning writer, an award-winning editor at this point, I'm sure, and also my agent. So, anyway, the process for each of those things, they're all so different, right? So, you know, when I'm writing nonfiction for like young people, I'm trying to fill gaps, right? I'm trying to fill gaps in society and bring people along a journey. So, you know, something like my first book, The Black Friend, which again to this day, that's for 13-year-olds. You're like, oh my God, like I'm like, this is for kids, you know. But I love that adults love it so much. That means a lot to me. That book, I'm just thinking about what are the things not being taught in school, and how am I going to teach that in this book? With Patriarchy Blues, when I'm writing nonfiction for, you know, adults and, you know, young adults and so forth, I'm just being honest. I'm just getting some shit, you know. If we're gonna talk about transphobia, we're gonna talk about transphobia. I'm not trying to call you. I'm not trying to set third. We're gonna get to it. Novels, which Hafizah just. Anyway, novels. My debut novel comes out next summer actually, and I think novels. I'm doing a bit of both the things I'm doing with adult nonfiction and young people's nonfiction. I'm both telling the truth, but also trying to bring you along, right? Because I can have a character who serves as whatever like Patriarchy Blues does, and then I can have a character who serves whatever The Black Friend does, and then I can create a world in which I've forced you to just understand and lose yourself in it. So, and then I guess poetry. A lot of jazz, a lot of Coltrane, a lot of Billie Holiday, just a lot of jazz and probably a lot of scotch. Like, when I think about this book, I'm like, this was a lot of scotch. Yeah.
So, how long did it take you to write this?
So some of the pieces I actually have been working on or have for years, and I think that I always wanted to write a poetry collection. I just wanted to wait for the right time in my career where I can like sell more than like a copy. And so, I would say writing it took me, it's like editing and things of that nature before getting out a year plus. Yeah.
So when you were writing, there's some people who are just like, they don't read when they're writing because they don't want to be like influenced or whatever. Do you read alongside of writing? If so, what are you reading? Or is it like music? What do you do?
Never. Because I feel like if I have a gift in this world, I can like match a lot of people's prose, and that's like a really terrible.
You're like a chameleon.
Yeah, and that's like a terrible thing because I'm like, ooh, and this is what Terrence Hayes would do, or this is what Tracy K. Smith would do, or this is like I remember even reading your poetry collection. I was like, I didn't go back to this. I'm like, no. Like she smoked this right here, and if I tried that, I'm like, nope, don't do it. And so I try to just listen to music. I watch a lot of movies. Okay. Right. So like, there's things in here. Like there's a poem that I'm talking about I'm talking about whiteness, but I'm talking about whether white people are redeemable in a white supremacist society. But I use the show Ted Lasso to talk about it, right? So I'm watching a lot of Ted Lasso, and I'm like, man, I really like Ted Lasso. I wish that there were more white people like Ted Lasso. I'm like, he's probably racist, you know? And so I'm like, I'm having this, this battle if you would. And I'm like, let me just put this on the page, the battle and the difficulty I'm feeling watching the show and seeing like decent white people. And then we met Ted Lasso, and he was like really nice.
Did he stay in character?
You know what? His whole life might be, because he's like the biggest WNBA like person. He might just, I hope that he just actually Ted Lasso. You know, we'll time will tell.
I love that. So for those of you who haven't read the book covers loss, fatherlessness, severed family ties, and depression, but I think it's also a book that's full of hope and wonder. And so how do you balance just like the light and the dark, especially with the things you're talking about?
I think to balance the light and the dark, I just maintain being black and alive. And I wanted to inject that in the book. I think that for me, the very idea of the title, like We Alive, that right there is something to celebrate, especially if you look around at just the many things that are going on, the many things that have been going on. I can't think of a period, you know, we always, or the internet makes this joke, like I'm tired of unprecedented times, right? Like, that is just the nature of being alive, right? And so taking that and the idea that I'm a beloved being, and that everyone who reads this, everyone who looks at the title, everyone who looks at the images is a beloved being, right? That's what I just tried to inject in it, right? So I would write something that's like really heavy, right, let's say, and then I would also, like, one of my favorite poems, and this is not one I think that people will necessarily, you know, be whatever, like, it's not one of the things people write home about, but one of my favorite poems is actually this poem about whether black women's most free that they are is on their way to Essence Fest. And it's like a very simple poem in theory, but actually it's a very, like, for me, I'm like, well, this is a very deep thought that I had to myself. Is the freest moment of a black woman's life, like, heading to Essence Fest, right? Where it's just like, we're all these black women on a plane, going to the one place that's like curated for us and by us, and what does that look like just on our way? Where we're just in the state of expectation.
Well, were all the flight attendants black on the plane too?
This was Soul Plane. What do you mean? This was Soul Plane. Yeah, this was. Everyone was black. Everyone was black and leftist.
But like, so were you like constantly like, okay, like I've got 5 sad poems or about death I need to add up. Like, is it like that methodical or is it more organic?
I think of death, or like at least I've started recently thinking of death in the last few years, primarily because I live with what's that character, Daria? I live with Daria, and so I'm constantly thinking of death and how you know, like, have you ever thought about the fact that some of us we just die sometimes, and like, but you know that's fine because there's trees. Whatever. And so I think of death in a multitude of ways, right? So like, let's say I'm writing a poem about my grandmother dying, which I do, but I'm reflecting on like this moment where I'm like helping pack up her house, right? And I'm just like, I asked this question in the poem, like how do you pack up a life, right? Like how do you pack up a legacy? Like, and how do you stand in like a kitchen and wonder if on the other side of this kitchen your grandmother's still there? Right? And so, like that, but then I also have, like, things about, I don't know, my uncles, right? And 2 of my uncles have passed. One passed during COVID, the other one passed of HIV, which I didn't find out till, like, in the last few years ago. And I write this poem about watching Westerns and how I became a fan of Westerns just because I missed my uncles, right? And just, like, what does it look like to honor their lives and death by like talking about watching a Western, right? So it's a death poem, but it's so much more.
Yeah, I love that because I think it's easy to forget that like perhaps one of the things that is so packed with life is a death, you know, because it all culminates and comes back. I think another thing that gives life to this book is also the photographs that are incorporated. Like they're beautiful photographs. It has very much like a just like black kids in the summer, the fire hydrants open feel. So talk to us about the photographs.
Yeah, so the design itself was done by Janae Frazier. The photographs I wanted the photographs. I knew already what I wanted. It kind of harkens back to many of the album covers by The Roots. There's one in particular for Undone where you'll see like a kid flipping on a mattress, and I was like, it has to be that, right? I need this cover. And I think it's how I think about my entire career. If I was to, pass away tomorrow and I left and all you have are these things from me, this has to be the book where like I told black kids, I told these kids in the summertime, jumping rope and blowing bubbles that I want you to be alive and I love you to death, right? And so I wanted the images, if you go through the book, and I know many of you don't have the book because it was supposed to release yesterday and we did it, but when you do eventually get it, those of you who might get it today, there's like those images throughout the collection, kids popping wheelies and, on the phone. And there was one picture that didn't make it that I wanted so badly, and we didn't think that people understand it. I think some people in this room, it's a guy on the phone. It's an old cord phone, and the cord is like wrapped around his hand, just on the phone, just jonesing, you know what I mean? But there's a generation who's been like, what is that? I wanted that picture so bad, but I was like, a lot of young people read my work, and they're gonna be like, is that a battery?
They got adults with cord phones.
Anyway.
So it's interesting what you're saying that like your YA is like about filling the gaps, right? And so it feels like that as I was reading the poetry collection, that it's not about filling gaps, more about like reclamation.
Yeah.
And so I think, what is it that you think this book in particular is attempting to reclaim?
Life. I think that we let so much of the world steal life from us, whether we're talking about capitalism, social media, white supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, so just all these things stealing life from us. Oh, it's the first of the month. Oh, I just got paid, but also the rent's due. Damn, like I worked at Walmart or I worked at Red Lobster. Shout out to Red Lobster. I can't believe I'm bankrupt. Damn. But I worked this job and I'm getting my check just to give it to this entity, right? I wanted to just reclaim, again, being beloved, because I do feel like more than ever now, especially with the digital sphere that we have, we're living at times a half-life, being like diluted as people. And then I think specifically, I'm the book was done before I wrote a few poems that I really want to push over in here. So if you all buy enough copies, I'll get another print right now. I'll put these other poems, but there's a lot of poems. I wrote a poem about Aaron Bushnell, which I personally wanted in this, couldn't make it. I wrote a poem. I've written a lot of poems that are just about the loss and the heartache happening to Palestinians, and it just meant so much to me. I feel like that's also reclaiming, right? Like, you cannot forget Hein's name, right? Like you cannot forget the names of these people because we won't let you. And so, yeah, I want to reclaim all of it, right? I mentioned George Stinney. For those who don't know who George Stinney is, you can go and Google who George Stinney is after reading this poetry collection. I'm trying to reclaim what's been taken from us.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you threw out Red Lobster. You know why they're closing, right? Landlords.
Yes, capital.
Yes.
So okay, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I need to talk about this really quick because it actually has everything to do with what we're talking about. So an entity bought Red Lobster. I used to work at Red Lobster. You all wouldn't even know me. No, so this is so funny story. So shout out to Red Lobster. I wouldn't even have a goddaughter and niece if it wasn't for Red Lobster because my best friend also worked at Red Lobster and met his wife there. But I worked at Red Lobster in Scarsdale, New York. It was called Fred's Lobster at the time because I was there so much. And working at Red Lobster actually helped pay for me to go to college. Right, so if Red Lobster didn't exist, I don't know that I would have necessarily been able to afford school and make that type of money coming from where I came from. All that being said, what happened to Red Lobster was an entity bought them. They are, like, I think, a real estate magnate, if I'm not mistaken. And they then started selling the property that Red Lobster was on to other groups and then charging Red Lobster the rent for that property, right? So Red Lobster's like, you own us and you're also forcing us to pay rent at an exorbitant rate that we haven't paid before. We cannot.
They used to own their property before they were sold.
And then the same entity sold the property and made them pay rent on the property. That's bananas. That's yeah.
And me and Fred are currently the two people most mad about this in the room.
I don't feel like the room is angry about this. Yeah, you understand? Red Lobster is not going to exist anymore. We're just like, oh, that's fine.
Well, that's gonna be a poetry book too. Red Lobster.
It's gonna be me and you. It's gonna be me and you in front of Red Lobster.
Shut up the biscuits.
Who said that? Yes.
question. So I remember like when I was getting when I was in grad school for poetry like over a decade ago, it was just like such a funny time where people were just like, poetry shouldn't be political, and like it was just like LOL. But like it was mainly white people saying that, right? And I think that we entered a period where then like poetry I think became like extremely political and started a lot of writing, thankfully. But I feel like we can see ourselves swinging back towards the other end in a very scary way. And so I'm wondering, can you speak to how in your work the personal has informed the political and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, and I hate to be cliche, I'm black in America. There's no way, unless I was like, there's just absolutely no way. Even if you are Herman Cain, right? Like, as much as Herman Cain dedicated his life to being anti-black in America, he still died a black man from COVID. Like, the irony, and COVID doesn't exist. And so for me, where I was brought up, where I'm from, my family, right? The things we eat, the things we cry about, right? A Mary J. Blige song, Al Green song, like I said, Coltrane, the Police, all these different things, do the right thing. All this is so political. All of this is so black. You can't remove any of it. And so, like you said, that has to be said by white people. And I do see that actually happening, and I think that a great deal of that has happened with my poetry, right? I think the idea that a cishet black dude, who's 6'2" and has tattoos could be talking about grief, and that matters more than me just being like, the police try to kill me, the police try to kill me. And sure, yes, and we are writing about that. And also, there is still a deep political aspect to just, I'm grieving the fact that like my friend is gone. I'm grieving the fact that the earth is dying, right? I'm grieving the fact that like children are finding their parents under rubble. I'm grieving all of it. I'm not just going to grieve and hurt or even have joy based on your time in American white supremacy. Just I refuse.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to ask you to read another poem, but before that, I think it's like what you're saying, kind of, it's less as a question, but I think one of the things I love about this collection is that, like, if I was going to give like a single word to describe it, it'd just be tenderness, right? There's just so much tenderness for family members that, like, even family members that you're estranged from. And so, kind of like a question, can you just like talk about tenderness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most important thing that we have, and I try to lead with it because I think that our society lies about black men having it. The most tender relationships I have, for the most part, are those with the people I read poems for earlier, besides Portia, I hate those Portia, actually. But yeah, Portia's my wife, I'm like, y'all know. And so for me, I try to lead with that, even being tender with the people I'm angry with, right? I'm angry with my parents. I'm angry with, I'm angry with a lot of different things. I'm angry with publishing, but how do you also be tender with writing?
Yeah.
Right? One of my closest friends, T right here, we disagree all the time, and yet somehow we find ways to be tender in our disagreement, right? Like, we fight constantly, like Robert and I back there. Robert Jones Jr., New York Times bestseller, National Book Award finalist. But Robert and I were disagreeing about something, and I just called him. He didn't answer the call, and I just 2 days later was like, "You still mad about that?" And he's like, "No, I'm not." And it's just like there's just a relationship that's just rooted in loving on each other. And if I don't do anything for the rest of my life, I will display that black men can love on people.
Yeah, I love that. All right, read us another poem.
Okay. I'm gonna read a longer one this time. Ooh, this is a good one. Or maybe it's not. I think it's good.
No caveats.
Stumbling through self-care. And you know what? Actually, no. Because I want you all to read that first. You talking about, this is DeMarcus, who's another one of my great friends, and Nick. They both messaged me about this poem, so I'm going to read this one. It's entitled My Father's Void. The ink had not dried on my birth certificate when my father's form became vacant. Casualties of Reagan's war on blackness. A cradle left to be rocked by echoes of sirens and fleeing footsteps. Gone not as thief, stealthy and kind, rather as smoke, dissipates, abandoning the fire. But with his ghost, he left me an inheritance, not a void, rather a container, a black hole. On the other side is me, pulling in the fragments of cosmos from every soul who leans in close, pouring into me parts of themselves as hugs, kisses, laughter, shoulders to cry on. In the black hole my father left, the vast expanse of that darkened space, stars were born from every tear I shed. I learned the dance of resilience, feet bare on the shards of what he could not give. I arose, clear and rare, whole.
One more question and then open it up to questions. And so, the activist and abolitionist Karen Pava says, hope is a discipline. I think we all know that famous quote now. And so, I think that, I can see that discipline in these pages. And I think that you can see, I can see your hope muscle sweating, that I can see the work of it. And so I'm wondering, how do you maintain, your hope discipline as a writer, not just in the delivery, but in the act of writing?
It's interesting. I will shout out one person specifically. Nick Stone actually said something, I think, to Portia and I when we were doing an interview with her. She was talking about the work of a YA and a young people author is different than the work of anyone who writes in any other space, because your job is to create hope constantly. No matter what you're talking about, you have to get back to hope. And so actually I'm like, well, in our own ways, we're all just children, right? No matter how old you are still the embodiment of all the ages you've ever been. If you are 55, you're still 15, you're still 5, right? Because it all stacks up and lives in your body. And so I wanted to bring us back to that constantly, and I try to bring myself back to that constantly. So even in this poem, my father wasn't around, my father didn't care for me. I am in therapy now in large part because of it. And yet still I understand as a scholar and someone who's educating the subject, this is in large part because of Reagan's war, right? So my hope in that poem is not just that other people pour into me, but that I can almost slightly forgive my father because he was the casualty of white supremacy and an institution that planned for he and I not to know each other, right? And so while it might sound, dreadful, for me it's actually hopeful, because if we can dismantle that, how many more fathers do we have in lives, right?
Yeah. Preach. All right, let's have some questions. I will call on people.
Hi, Fred.
Hey, Tori.
I'm trying to siphon advice right now. What's your writing process when you're going through a writer's block for many months?
So just going to say for the people, the question is your process for when you're having writer's block for many months.
You're gonna hate this answer.
I get your emails, I already know what it is.
I don't get writer's but I'll explain why. I will explain why. Because I write in, I don't box myself in genre-wise, right? So while I was writing this collection, there were plenty of times I'm like, I don't really have it in me to look at this poem 25 more times. But God, if I didn't see two kids holding hands and walking down the street, and if I don't have a scene in me from something else that might not exist yet, right? So I would say that, right? If you were sitting here and you're like, oh, I love this space, you might want to just go write about the space and put it somewhere. And if you're like, oh, now that I've written about the space, I have that first paragraph about that other thing, right? Or if you're listening to, if you're listening to Frank Ocean, like, damn, Frank Ocean just said some shit. But if he would have said this, and just write whatever that thing is down, right? Like, I have 55 books in me, which is one reason why Hafizah signed me. We're going to make some money. because I'm just all over the place. And I guess as your friend, I dare you to be all over the place.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Fred,
So,
thank you. I'm trying to figure out how to read this collection. I could go home tonight, get the hookah going, drink a lot of scotch, read tonight. Or I quickly looked at the table of contents, 60-ish poems. I could do one a day, really meditate on it, really take it slow. If you could tell me or us how you would like us to read it, what would that be like?
I would like you to read it the same way I wrote it, which was just again, all over the place, right? So if you look and you're just like, oh man, sorry, I don't know what that thing is. Here we go. Yes. So if you're just like, we can't forget. What can't we forget? Right? And then you're hopping around, you're like, Sonnet of the Skin. That's literally what I want people to do. It's not a novel, right? It's not a novel. This is not a journey to get to the end. Like, I did it. I want people to be messaging me about this collection 10 years from now. Like, hey, I've had this, I read maybe even just 10 poems from it, and I picked it up and went back to one, right? Because people still do, I'm doing that with poets who I love. I'm like, damn, I never read this Sonia Sanchez poem. I never even heard of this poem, right? Or Gwendolyn Brooks or Tracy K. Smith, whomever. I'm just like, I never read this. Because that's just not how poetry works. I think that you might also, if you got through it through a night, I would then push back and you didn't actually do what you're supposed to do in that case, because I want you to sit in the poems though. Right? Sit with there's a poem called The Odyssey. I think that The Odyssey should actually take people quite some time. What I do is,
That was going to be one of my questions to ask you because I love that. I wanted to just say a little something.
all right, so The Odyssey, so one of my minors was in the classics. So I read a lot of Homer. And what I did was I used some classical language, if you would, to tell the Odyssey of the black man in America. Right, so it starts out with and I frame it our champion is born, right? Think 300, and you go from black boy, all the things are possible in the world within his community, but now our black champion, our kid who can do anything, goes to school, and they tell him he's not shit, and then he makes it through, and he goes off to college, but now the only way he can get through is by doing X, Y, and Z. And the other thing about it is this is his first time around white women, and they all just see him as a big black dick, right? And so, and that's the reality of it, right? So then eventually you get to black escapist, and I play with the idea, is the ultimate place that you want to get to as a black person leaving all this shit behind. So if somebody was to say, hey, I got through the collection, I'm like, damn, you don't give a shit. So if that's the answer.
I got Robert in the background.
Okay, brother. What do you make of identity as trend?
Woo!
Wait, so the question is about identity as trend.
So for example, you know how everyone was rushing to read black writers and artists after George Floyd because they felt guilty. Then when they got over that guilt, it was Trump's anti-Asian remarks and how everyone was attacking Asian people. We rushed to read those people. And that's over now. God knows who's next. Women, now that the anti-abortion stuff, everyone's rushing to read women. Why is it for marginalized artists, we're only popular during Black History Month or AAPI Month or whatever it is, but we're not read normally as a part of the normal curriculum of reading? What do you think that is?
I mean, you know what it is. You just not. Exactly. I mean, you know what it is. I mean, but the reality of it is, I'll go a step further though, because I think that we also sadly sometimes do aspects of it to ourselves, right? And by that I mean, I had a conversation with a really good friend the other day, Angelica Ross, trans actress, activist, writer, and we've known each other for a long time. And I don't, Angelica, you wouldn't watch this, but if for some reason you ever see it, I'm just gonna be really honest about the conversation to get back. So Angelica she asked, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "What's up?" She said, "Well, your first book, The Black Friend, a lot of us were like taken aback by that because like, you know, you were doing the same thing as Emmanuel Acho, right? Now, for those of you who don't know who Emmanuel Acho is, I'm not going to give him too much time on what is for maybe 2 more minutes of my stage. But he is a...
Cool.
Yes, that is... God, you are so good with words. So, yes, he is that. And so I asked her, I'm like, what do you mean with the thing? She's like, oh, well, The Black Friend, it's obviously... I'm like, did you open it? She's like, well, no, because I'm sure like you're coddling white people. I'm like, you've known me for 10 years. When have I ever coddled white people? When do I coddle anybody? I don't even barely know how to coddle my goddamn self. What are you talking about? And she's like, so what's it about? I'm like, I'm literally writing, the one white person, for example, featured it, her father was in the Klan, and the whole, I'm like, you're a white supremacist, and don't talk to your family because you're a white supremacist, right? And so in that example, you have a trans black woman who I've been in community with, shared deep moments with, supported, and vice versa in different instances, and whomever she was talking to, you have a bunch of black people literally judging a book by its cover, right? Like, and I'm like, we can't do that to each other. We can't do that to each other. It doesn't matter what group you belong to, right? We can't say, oh, well, this looks like that, and therefore, because I do think that happens in publishing all the time, right? We were just talking about this earlier. I am a big black dude, and so people are like, I don't want to read poetry by a big black dude. Have you read poetry by a big black dude? Right? Like, why don't you want to read it? Oh, because you're not saying that you would rather see me catching a football, right?
Or a bullet.
Well, so that's the answer. And all in all, it's all rooted in white supremacy. That's it.
And your turn, Robert?
No,
Are we at time?
We have time for one more.
Okay, alright. I'm gonna let you pick since these are your friends.
Well, not all of them. We're now friends.
Alright, we got 2 hands up.
We can do 2 questions.
Okay.
Yay!
Mine should be quick. Just to the previous question, I teach high school English, and I'm wondering if there are authors or texts that you think should be included in the curriculum that are maybe not normally.
Yeah, I'm gonna, so next summer, this thing of Hours comes out by Frederick Joseph. I actually, I will, do you mean non-fiction or fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction? I'm gonna be really honest, like On the Come Up, I really love, I think Angie did her thing with that. A lot of Jacqueline Woodson, definitely have to have some Jacqueline Woodson in there. Jason Reynolds, gotta be in there. There are not a lot of YA work plays on tropes so heavily because people know that they have to make it into white educators' curriculum that I actually hate. Which is why I focus on YA writing because like Evie Zagoy also, Punch in the Air is really good. I love Evie Zagoy's work. But there's not a lot of people. I think that people sacrifice not just black bodies in their work, but just like marginalized bodies constantly for white gaze. And so what we can do is I can give you my email and I'm happy to like actually give you a list. But right now on the top of my head in terms of what's popular, there's just not a lot that I feel like does justice to this moment or the moments ever.
We did Long Way Down, Jason Reynolds.
See? I was like, see?
I also actually wanted to add to the conversation before, but like marginalized groups, white people like to look at marginalized groups when they see us suffering, and it's hard to see us having joy, which is probably why like your view of masculinity, your tenderness is a threat to the rigid idea of masculinity, and that's why it makes white people uncomfortable.
Absolutely. I think to add on to that though, I think we've gotten past, I think what's happened to Palestinians is demonstrated that we've gotten past actually white guilt. I think that now we're in this new era of white apathy, right? Where the 2020, most white people, I mean, you all get it, if you whataboutism me, I don't, you can walk out. But white people decided that the work was done in 2020 and don't understand or comprehend how they don't get their gold star, and why if they bought Ibram Kendi, why do I have to have another one of these people on my shelf? Right, and that doesn't just extend to black people. That extends to Palestinians, right? You look at what's happening right now. They're just like, I shared my AI-generated Rafa image. God, what else do you want from me? And that's because, like, I've done the work. The black square, the black friend, we alive beloved. I'm supposed to also support. How many Palestinians? What do you want? And so I think that the guilt is gone. And I think we need to all understand that, because when you get past guilt and you can't speak to that, then it has to be focused on liberation solely. There is no conversation. There are plenty of white people in this room who I love dearly, and thank you for being here. And those are the people that when you find them, keep them at the table with you, do the work, and everybody else, it's on.
And I'm sorry, I did actually have a question. In the lasso way, you said there are times when I'm a good black person. Does that mean there are times when you're a bad black person? And if so, what does that look like?
I really wish that more people would have been able to get the collection to actually have a conversation, but so I say it in the context of even thinking that any white people are redeemable, right? So even the moment just now when I'm like, most white people, I'm like, does that make me a non-radical black person by even giving the caveat of some white people, right? And I constantly live in this duality of what makes a good leftist, radical black man in America, right? Because the reality of it is I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go back to Long Island City, and I live in a really nice townhouse, right? And most people, for me to say the things I say, want me to live in a cardboard box, right? And so when you have that, I'm like, okay, well, what makes, and that's not just white people, other black people also want you to live in a cardboard box. And so I'm like, okay, what is a good black person? I like Ted Lasso. Oh, you're not black because you're watching Ted Lasso. God damn it, they got me again, right? I'm like, I can tell you, yes, I love Nas, and I'm also a really, really big John Mayer fan. Not at this point anymore, but historically, love Joni, love. I can have a conversation about Joni Mitchell and Stevie Nicks for the next 3 hours, right? Does that make me a bad black person? Yes. Somebody said yes. That was Robert Jones.
I think that boo on Robert is sad. Thank you everyone for coming. Another round of applause. And have him sign it. They're over there, right? Yeah. All right, fantastic.
Hafizah's book is there as well, and Robert's favorite book by me, Patriarchy.
All right, thanks so much. Enjoy.
Sorry, just 1 second. We just wanted to give a shout out, thank you to Brooklyn Close for hosting us tonight.
Yes.
As they said, yes. We're gonna have Frederick sign right here. We're gonna have a line kind of forming down this aisle here. If you're still listening to the live stream, you can buy a book in the live stream description. Yes, as we said, there are books right there. Thank you all so much for coming. Please remember to grab your items. Have a great night.